This is Hindsight and High Heels, conversations for women who have lived, learned, and are still becoming. We explore life transitions, leadership, and how perspective evolves over time. I'm Anne Witkavitch. Thanks for joining. Today, we're here with Allison Levin, a certified career coach and professional speaker with Career Wave Coaching. And what she does is she works with her clients and she helps them navigate all the different areas of their careers, from job searches and interviews to promotions and that big picture planning that we have to do with our careers. So we met earlier. We both were presenters at a wonderful women's leadership conference, and I thought she would be a great guest to have on the program. So, Allison, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. I was so excited to see the invite to join you today. So I appreciate you thinking of me.
Wonderful. Thanks. And, after we met, I, of course, went on LinkedIn and I followed you, and you had this post pop up. And I had to read it twice because you talked about questions. And I assumed that this was an interview you actually had where you were
Yeah.
asked four questions. And one was, what's your marital status?
Mm-hmm.
Another, what's your religion?
Yeah.
Another, do you have kids?
Yeah.
And then another one was, if you have kids, then who's going to take care of them if you have to travel for your job?
That's correct.
And I was really just surprised and disheartened, quite frankly, that those type of questions were still being asked. And I remember them, especially early in my career,
Yeah.
being asked those same type of questions, like point blank being told,
Mhm.
I know I'm not supposed to ask you this,
Yeah.
but I'm going to ask anyhow.
Hmm.
Um, and of course I did not accept that position, um, but it reminded me that in so many ways, the landscape has changed,
Hmm.
especially for women in their careers and in very good ways.
Yes.
But in a lot of ways, it's remained surprisingly the same. So it got me thinking about how women are navigating their careers today. And it's a different workplace, though. The rules change incredibly fast. So I want to have you in for a conversation. Even for someone like me, I've been in the workplace a long time and the ground is constantly shifting. But if we start here, what are you seeing that is genuinely getting better for women today in the workplace? And then what do you see as those places that there really hasn't been a lot of change, or maybe some new things have cropped up?
Yeah.
But what are you talking to your clients about? What are the disconnects that you're still seeing out there?
Yeah, thanks, Anne. And I wanted to just acknowledge that you were not the only one that after I posted that, they had asked me, did this really happen? And the reason why they asked me that was this was actually pretty recent. It was about a year and a half ago. It was for a director role of a customer success position. And the reason why I think it was surprising is my background too, as well as I've worked in human resources. So I actually used to train people on how to interview.
Oh,
So I think a lot of people are like, did this really happen? And I did. And it was an in-person interview as well. So it was me and two other people. So I think it was a different dynamic. All those questions were not asked at the same time, but it was throughout the interview. Those four questions were asked. Similar to what you had mentioned, I knew from the first question that shouldn't have been asked that this was not going to be a place for me. So I did not
mm,
end up pursuing that role either. But again, I think I wanted to share the story because I figured I am probably not the only one that's going through this. And just by the people I posted on LinkedIn to and my in-person network, there's a lot of conversation. But back to the point where you were saying, what's going on currently. A few things I think to start off on more of the positive side, I really do see more women, like when I look at my career, more women that are in those senior leadership roles, that are in those executive roles. So I do see that that is moving forward. Now, I don't think it's moving forward at the pace that all of us would love, and we can get into that in a few moments. But I would say that that is something I would have leaders that I could look up to that would question and challenge others. And that was something that I think I didn't know you could do. There was one leader in particular who was a senior director, and she had told me that she was not going to join this company if there were not at least an even number of females on the board and in our C suite. And I go, and I just remember being like, oh, okay, she looked at that. And it was interesting to me at that point, but I was glad to see that she was questioning and she wouldn't join an organization if that wasn't how it was set up. So,
That's really there's a couple of things I wanna add to that, or comment on, and one is what you said earlier about, finding out through LinkedIn, through social media, through talking to people that they were questioning, as I did,
yeah,
"Did this really happen to you?" And being kind of surprised when it was recent.
yeah,
And I think, when I think back earlier in my career, there was no LinkedIn. There was really no way to share that
yeah,
you went through that experience and to have that, critical mass, I would call it,
mhm,
of people saying, "No, that's happened to me too." So, that's one difference I see just
yeah,
from a generational standpoint was that you kinda went through it early in my career, and fortunately, I knew it was something that shouldn't happen, and I was able to respond to it. I don't even remember how, but I did it in a professional way. But then over time, and this falls into what you were also mentioning, and having, leadership roles, I have to say that that has been one of the best things is having women who either I worked with or reported to or whatever that were they had learned, and again, hindsight, they were able to share down. I've had the hindsight from them as well as my own. I've
yeah,
been able to share it. And I do think that there's this huge it's something I've always, I guess mentored women to do is to really look at that organization that you're joining and, do your research for any you should just do
yeah,
that. Anyone should do that for a job search, but look for how the board looks, how the executive
yeah,
team looks. You may be levels from the executive team, but
yeah,
it tells a story.
yes,
So, yeah, no, I appreciate that comment a lot because
yeah.
I think it's we all have a responsibility to be changing it along the way.
And because she mentioned that to me, I now did that moving forward. And this was years ago she told me that. And it stuck with me. So I'm glad to hear that that's something you share too as well. And I
Yeah.
agree with you. I think the social media and the platforms were able to reach more people and to share things that are happening.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. Um, so, one thing for me, and it's a word I bring up all the time is authenticity.
Yeah.
And I think for women particularly, just culturally and societal, perspective that there is conditioning, right?
Mhm.
That men are conditioned a certain way, from the time we're in school on, women are conditioned a certain way. And we do a lot of work to try to fit into the room that we're walking into.
Yep.
And I try to coach that anyone should be authentic, but particularly women,
Hmm.
but you do have to do it carefully to be able to fit.
Yes.
Can you just talk a little bit about that from your perspective? Because I think it's something I still think about, and I think women do try to figure out how they fit, especially if they wanna be authentic to who they are now. And fortunately, we're seeing it with men too of, "Yeah, I have a family,
Yeah.
and they're important to me. No, I don't have a family because that's a choice I've made. It doesn't mean I can work extra hours," that kinda thing.
Yeah, I think I do have a good example of when I realized that I was showing up that way at work. So, one of the things I think starting off, I was always nervous about what I should share about my personal life, about my family. So, I had two kids, I was in a leadership role. I didn't quite honestly want that to be seen as something that would impact my career. Hence, going back to that, interview questions. But, at my one of my roles, I was running a sales team, and one of my peers that was on the other team came to me, and he asked me about the parental leave that was offered at our company. And he had said to me, he goes, "Do you think I should take it?" And I had said to him, he was in a leadership role. I said, "Yes." I go, "And I'm going to tell you for a couple of reasons." I said, "One, your wife is going to need you during that time." This was their first child. Our company at that time had paid leave for parental leave. So it was an awesome opportunity. This wasn't something that was available when I had my children, but it was at this organization. So I encouraged him to do that. I also said to him, I said, "You're going to show your team members who are mostly male," because he had run his side of the business was the pre-sale side. "You're going to show them that you're doing it. So you're going to be a good role model for them too as well." So I knew that because I had shared that I had children, that I had a full life, he felt comfortable enough to come and ask me that question as a peer. And he did take the leave. So I was happy to see that because
That's
I feel like
wonderful.
in those sales roles, that is not something that, in my perspective, has been encouraged a lot. So it was great to see that.
I think in a lot of roles, and one of the things I'm hearing in this conversation evolve, and I've seen it, is that, what's the word I wanna look for it? That intersection, if you will, of, we talk about women, we talk about
Yeah.
men, we tend to, you know, categorize people, but
Yeah.
it's really more about an evolving cultural thing in terms
Yeah.
of how do you blend work, how do you blend home, and, COVID obviously threw that up in the air and in good and bad ways. And I do remember, like, m I've had mentors who have been men and women,
Yeah.
and I remember a CEO in particular I worked for who, uh, I remember there was something that was being planned, and he was like, I have, it was a son's football dinner or something. He's like, I'm going to that. It's been years, but I still remember that because that sent a message to me as a
Yeah.
woman that it was okay. And I
Yeah.
don't, and to be clear, I don't think that was probably shared even for him to do that across the board
Yeah.
back then. But they say actions speak louder
I
than
agree.
words. But I think you have to understand that the actions have an impact.
Yes, and I think sometimes they can be bigger than you expect. You and I are having conversations about things that happened in the past, and they still are important to us, and they still are part of our decision making, or even what we share with people. We said, "Hey, we heard this," and it
Mhm.
was really impactful. So I 100% agree.
I think another, and by the way, I've heard from men I know who one said they listen to the podcast even though it's geared towards women because
Yeah,
they get to learn perspective, but it also so much that we talk about is really encompassed across everybody.
yeah,
And, I think that when you don't realize as a role model or how much what you do and how you behave is really a part of how a culture develops. And I've done culture work. You've done culture work in our fields of communications and human resources, right? Culture is always part of it, but it really is about individual people and how they collectively work together and the values that they show.
yep.
One of the things I want to ask you about, and it's been in the news a little bit more lately, is that men showing up as role models, and that was a great example what you gave, but that everything they do
Mhm.
reflects back on a culture that has built over years, and to
Yeah,
change it, women have to change behaviors, but men have to change behaviors too. So, and we're not just talking interviewing process, but just the workplace and
of course.
looking to promote or have a fulfilling career. Any thoughts on that in terms of how it can be less a conflicting kinda conversation and more about how the alignment comes in.
Yeah, I honestly think a lot of it is just having those conversations, and it all starts with relationships. I think that's the biggest thing where
Mm,
the relationship part is what made that person in my example feel comfortable coming to me, because we had had lots of conversations both about work and about life. We had traveled together for work events. So I think that it is important to bring not your whole life to work. I
Right,
don't think
right.
your whole life, and that's what I'll tell my clients. But I think it's important to share key moments or how things impact you, because that other people can see themselves in you, or they can strive that way. And also, I don't think, to your point, it's not always gendered either. It could be that you're a role model to someone on another team or to a peer. So I think just having conversations with people, learning about them, that makes your workplace better, because you're starting to have connections with people. You might know someone that reads books that you like, and that's a conversation point. It doesn't always have to be work related, and that starts to develop more. And I think that's where trust starts to develop, where if you start
Yeah.
to build that relationship, share things that are work appropriate with one
Right.
another. I definitely have stories of non-work appropriate conversations, but we will not get into those today. So I just think that's probably the number one thing I recommend people do in any part of how they're working, is just like building those relationships.
I think that's so key is relationships, and trust is such an important word. We talk about it. Judgment is another word that comes
Yeah,
in a lot, and you really have to be a judge of people. And
yep,
that doesn't mean to be judgy. It
correct.
means to be able to kind of look at somebody and kind of understand, our boundaries. I think boundaries are a big
Yeah.
thing. Are boundaries being
Mhm.
honored, or are they, being pushed against? And I think comfort too.
Yeah.
And I go back to role model, and I just remember somebody said, "Anne recognizes that she's a role model." That really stuck with me because I do try to be very, true to my values when I operate. I'm kind of what you see is what you get person, good or bad sometimes, um, but I'll share a story, and,
Yeah.
I don't think that she would mind me doing it, but there was somebody who had been an early career person when I was in a leadership role, and we've become friends over the years and are still in touch, and she remembered one day running into me in the ladies' room, and, we chatted a few minutes, and I guess I asked, like, "Oh, how's it going? How's your rotation going, etcetera?" And she said she was just so amazed that somebody who had a leadership role took a few minutes to just say, "How's it going?" And I didn't remember it when she brought it up, like, a decade or more later, and I was like, "Yeah, that's true, though, because you never know how you're affecting people," and I think that's really important in the interview process. It's important when
Yep.
you're on the job, and it's
Mhm.
important in the day-to-day
Yeah.
interactions that you have.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, like, the hierarchy is there whether we see it or not. And I
Yeah.
think that's one thing that sometimes we forget about. And that's what it seems like. I can remember myself back early in the career, probably like her being like, "Ooh, someone talked to me," so they had a conversation with me. So
Let me ask you a little
yeah,
bit more about that from your
yeah,
perspective. How do you manifest
yeah,
that in a role in your career?
yeah.
Because we always talk about building
Mhm.
leadership skills, and some of it's innate, and then other things you have to work on a little bit. What what helps somebody, particularly a woman, be
Yeah,
able to have that comfort, or that comfort of having strength in those skills versus seeing caring as the soft skill, or
yeah,
"Oh, that's a woman does that." And on the flip side too, how do you get empathy
yeah.
across the board with men too? Because I think women and men have to learn and develop the skill in different ways to reach the same point.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I'm always saying, it's like, I know I'd mentioned kind of like the relationships, but you do need to put yourself in situations where you feel uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable in a way like something's going to happen to you, but like you may be nervous to talk to somebody.
Mhm.
You may be like, "Hey, this person's two levels above me." Now, you don't have to go into that conversation without doing research and knowing a little bit about that person, or maybe asking a friend or a peer, like, "Hey, what's some of the things I should do?" So you can do some research, like similar to what you do in like interview processes if you are in like the workplace. So you can do some research and prepare, but you need to start to get comfortable with talking to people in different levels, because what's going to happen is they can be advocates for you, because you don't want to just rely on your boss. And I know that might sound like a bold statement, but where you are in control of your career, and you may think right now that you want to be a director or VP in X number of years, and you probably know this just like me, paths are not straight. So you may change your mind and want to do something else, and that's 100% normal. So the reason why I say that is start to meet with people in roles you're interested in, or start to meet with people just different spaces and learn more. They could be a peer, they could be someone that works an intern, they could be someone that's a director. I just think starting to get out there, it's scary in the beginning. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. Um, but after time, you start to build a rapture, and people will know you to say, yeah, Anne's great. She came over, we chatted about this. And then you're starting to build your credibility, and something I like to call your like, your board of directors or your career board of directors. Like, who are those people that are in your corner? They should be some people at work, but also people outside of work as well.
Talk a little bit more about this because you just made a few very, very good points. Um, I saw it recently
Yeah.
in the last role I had where I was involved with the early talent program on the steering committee. And I remember this woman, she and another leader did like a fireside chat
Yeah.
with the people in the program.
Great.
And the response was like, "Oh my goodness," they were so excited, and we as the mentors in the program sat with our group. You just kept hearing how I can't believe how human these
Yeah.
people are. But when you're talking, and you're absolutely right that paths do veer and it's not linear.
Yeah.
How do you go about taking the ownership of the strategic direction of your career? Because I do think sometimes people get the impression, particularly women, that if they do that, they'll be taken care of.
Hmm.
And that's not true.
Correct.
Those people become your network, like you just said, but you still need to navigate. No one's going to be able to tell you, oh yeah, you shouldn't do this, but you should do this.
Correct.
How do you get that
Yeah.
sense? How do you coach people to get that sense
Yeah.
of taking ownership of their own strategic navigation?
It really starts with one simple question. What do you really like to do? And that's where you start. So
That's a
what
hard question.
I know. It's a simple question, but not an easy one to answer. So, and the reason why I say that is, that really can tell you a little bit about where you want to be. And then I follow up the question is, sometimes if that one's a tough one, what don't you like what you do in your current job or your current role? That also tells a lot. So you want to see like kind of the positives and negatives. Also, I've asked clients too, and I even did this to myself, is what are some things that you may volunteer for that other people don't? Like, what are things
Mm,
that you're interested in? So, an example for me is I am someone who likes to go and work in booths at like events. So, when we would have to go to conferences, I love talking to everyone at a conference. My coworkers thought I was nuts at the time. They're like, no one likes to do that. And I'm like, I do. And it goes back to I used to work career fairs at my first job, and that's just something I love interacting with people. And that's something, so I always got to go to them because no one else wanted to, but I genuinely enjoyed it. So there's certain things that even Anne, I'm sure you have some things that you love that your coworkers are like, I would never do that. And some of that's like leaning into that. What does that mean about you? For me, it means I like to be engaged with people in the public. I really like to talk about jobs, things like that. So it kind of then took me down, like, what should I do next?
yeah.
So I think those are kind of the two questions you start with, and then just start trying things out. There's things in your current role, if you're currently working, that you can start to try. Like you could ask, can I take on a project that has this involved? Maybe you find out you hate data. Good. You found that out at a job you're working at now. So there's things that you can do in your current state to just try things out.
And I want to bring up the question too about leadership roles.
Mhm.
And I do think people are somewhat conditioned sometimes to think they are supposed to go for leadership roles.
Yep.
Again, getting back to that linear, you're supposed to climb a
Totally.
ladder.
Yeah.
And if, as a woman, you're supposed to, crash through glass
Yeah.
ceilings. And how do you talk to people about deciphering? Are they really wanting a director level role? No, first of all, are you experienced enough? Because
Yeah.
I do think that's a disconnect I
Yeah.
see, is that people get into positions they haven't
Mhm.
done the early
Yeah.
homework on to be able to do them and to have the judgment and to make the tough
Mhm.
risk-taking questions,
Yeah.
or to be an individual contributor.
Yeah.
Uh, I'd like you to answer that, but then
Yeah.
also talk about this world where everyone's saying AI is taking over everyone's job,
Sure.
because I do think people
Yeah.
think AI means individual contributor, not
Yeah.
executive leader.
Yeah, so what I say so for, like, the linear career, I think, again, that has been something that, like, I experienced too as well, like, that was something I thought I had to do, and I think now that there's more of a narrative out there where it's questioning, like, "Is that what you want to do?" And I think even back to the beginning of our conversation, I think social media has actually helped with that, like, I think LinkedIn, all the different social platforms, whether it's the TikTok or the Instagram, I think that's helped have more people questioning things. And the reason that when I talk to clients, I begin to just about like, what are you looking for like values? Like, what is you want a typical day to look like? So, starting with that, and if they start to say, like, I really do want to like eventually get to manage a team, then you're asking kind of those follow up questions. Why? Like, what does that mean to you? Like, maybe they really want to be that coach and get the individuals to the next level. And that's something they've always wanted to do. But if they're saying, well, it's the next step, that's how I make more money, then I think it's having that conversation saying, no, that's not always the way you make more money. If that's their drive to make more money, or that's like the prestige. The thing is, there's other individual contributor paths that can go pretty far up, like principles. There's different ways that you can go that you might not be aware of, or different paths. So I think it's really just exploring the why behind it and just being like, does this really align with where you see yourself? And again, you may not be there at that exact place in a few years because things could change. But if you could look forward, is this where you want to go?
Talking about things changing so fast, something I've noticed is that job titles
Oh,
have become center stage.
yeah.
And I do think part of that, maybe a lot of it, is things like LinkedIn. That's kind of an
Yeah.
adverse effect. And companies just spend all this time, I think, coming up with these titles. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a communicator. I'm simple, clear. Like, say what
Yeah.
it is. Like,
Yep.
it's a job. Like,
Yep.
get what you're looking for. How how do people navigate that now? Because are they looking at titles more, or is there more work on your end to help
Yeah.
them navigate through all these terms and
Yeah.
jargon and stuff out there to get to that heart of what is it you wanna do and
Yeah.
what is
So
it you wanna get better at doing?
yeah, so that's a great question, Anne. So one of the things I do with my clients is I'll ask them to send me, like before they even tell me what they want their next job to be, ask them to send me an example of a job or job posting of a job they would like to do, what or apply for. And I think that tells a lot. And then from that, we start a conversation to be like, so it looks like from here you're looking to work either in a nonprofit sector, you're looking to work in, a private sector or a startup, and starting to understand like the industry and explaining that things are different depending what industry you're in.
Yeah, that's
Titles
true.
don't always mean the same thing. A title when you're working in a startup company is very different if you're working at a publicly traded company. So there's a lot of differences, but we can dig in to figure it out. The same goes along with salary expectations too in the different industries. So that's definitely a big conversation too. But it's almost just saying like, where do we start? Like, where do you think you want to end up? Or why did this job post speak to you? Tell me, and then we kind of dissect from there where we can go. But yeah, these are a lot of these initial conversations I'm having.
Yeah, and let me ask you about, again, the role of AI, and I'm
Yeah.
somebody who I use AI for certain things, and I refuse to use it for other things, and, I find what it does from a work perspective, productivity perspective, but going back on resumes and all,
Yeah.
it's an interesting intersection of this world, right? That
Mhm.
For a while, you were told you should use AI. People want to see you use AI for your resume. Then it was starting to be, oh, I can spot an AI generated resume. And I always found that AI would take the job description and my resume, and I ended up redoing it anyhow because I didn't recognize myself. Do people today, again,
Yeah.
this applies early career, anywhere
Yeah.
in a career, how do you navigate that being told things in a tough job market
Yeah.
and spending a lot of time just trying to lean into whatever anyone's telling you at that moment?
Yeah.
And our companies really, how are they looking at it from your
Yeah.
perspective? Kind of unbundle this world that we're in right now.
Yeah. So I would say that from the perspective of like the resumes and all of that, similar to what you said, I recommend that my clients do not use AI to generate it. A lot of times it's creating like duplicate like similar resumes for everyone in that field. The biggest thing that applicants or people who are currently working, it's the stories that you can tell on your resume. So similar and to all the
Yeah.
work that you do in communication, that is something that AI cannot do. They cannot have that human element. They can't tell those relationships you had, all of that. So that is the biggest differentiator I see, whether it's on your resume or if you want to do a cover letter, if there's some additional things you need to put on there. So that's what I typically tell my clients to focus on. What are the stories of what was the impact that this project had to the company, to you, to the organization? So really lean into that. For company wide, most of the companies that I've worked with, they are using AI a lot to streamline processes. So most of this, what I'll say is it is geared towards the startups because I tend to work closer with people in that area. But yes, they are taking a lot of data and they are getting insights much quicker. So yes, so what I'm seeing is they may not be backfilling if someone leaves an organization as quick as they used to, right? Because now
Mhm,
they're they're opening more capacity for their team members. Again, if their business starts to boom and they're getting more revenue, they're going to open those roles again. I do think AI is slowing down hiring. I don't think it's stopping hiring. I do think it's going to come back again towards that like human relationships. We're going to need it. It will even out, but we're in that flux still.
mhm. That's a great point, and one thing I've learned using Gen AI for my podcast, my business, a lot of things, a lot of my writing, never will have it right for me because I'm a writer, but it helps to synthesize the thinking and ask questions just like a person sitting there would do, and I think that's wonderful, and some of the interview tools too have been helpful. But I think when you're looking at that, talk to me a little bit your perspective because I know there's a lot of people, and again, it's across the gamut of where they are in career, who have done a job that is disappearing, or I shouldn't say disappearing, it's changing, or it's
Yeah.
not relevant anymore,
Yep.
and something else is being relevant, and it's across the board, and telecommunications is one
Yep.
field I've heard.
Yep.
They're like, "I've done telecommunications, I
Mhm.
still wanna do that," but frustration that they can't find another job doing it. How do you talk to people and get them to open up to say, okay, take these skills and apply it in a different way, but let go of that identity of who they were.
And it's really tough because again, like to your point, like this is their identity, this is their comfort too as well. Like I'm comfortable being this person.
Mhm,
And maybe going into a different field, a different industry, I might not be comfortable with that. It's kind of going back to we have to get people feeling uncomfortable because that's where the growth happens. I really believe that. So what I'll do with clients, again stepping back and talking not about their current role. What are they good at? What do they like to do? It's basically kind of zooming out so then we can zoom back in and figure out like where are those skills transferable. Again, this does take a lot of dialogue depending on the client to get them there, but if it's a certain field, like I had one where medical transcribers, we actually eliminated those roles, right? And I mean, this was I think like 15 years ago, eliminating those roles. And that's something where I think at the time, probably people didn't think that would get eliminated, right?
Mhm.
And now we're like, we still had those. So I think it does continue on. I do feel like we are getting a little bit more of a flux right now, right? AI is quick, it's chaos,
Yeah.
it's disruptive. So I think we're feeling it more at mass. But I think at the end of the day, it really is, things are always going to change. We just have to figure out how we're going to change with them, and try not to fight too much against it because it just makes it harder.
And I like to look 2 or 3 stages ahead. I have to do it in my work, I do it in life. What's happening now, I pay attention, but I'm looking like, what does it mean 2 to 3 years from now? How do you find, is there a fit for you
Yeah,
and where it's evolving to?
yeah.
Do you have that base foundational
Mhm.
expertise or information or skill that can be evolved
Yep.
to inform what it becomes down the road? Or if you don't, or if you don't care to, being able to let go of that, and then to your point, find where are your values? Where are you at now in your career too? I mean, we change in our careers. You don't
Yeah,
think you will early career, you do.
yeah.
Um, so that's I find it a very different world
Yeah, and I
for
think even
that.
to your point, like with AI, it is going to speed up processes. But one thing that I think is going to become more of is we're going to have more oversight and critical thinking. So that
Yeah.
is a skill. Critical thinking, the storytelling. Again, AI is not going to be able to tell us the story of what happened in that patient room. And if we go with the healthcare example, but I think the critical thinking skills is something that is what I tell my clients, focus on that, learn that. And the only way you learn that is from experience and being on the job or in interactions. So that's another important thing to really build up early in your career or
Yeah.
even mid career. I everyone I think still can benefit on sharpening your critical thinking skills. I think it's, you can evolve them all the time.
Developing critical thinking skills, I would say. It's something that's very dear to me is critical
Yeah.
thinking skills because so many people do not exercise them. And we have so much information now.
Yeah.
You should be able to exercise them and do it, well and hone it continuously. So I agree with that. And I would add the other piece of it is risk taking,
Yes.
and that it's all tied together, that judgment, risk taking, trust, all of it ties together. And it goes back to that human element of you only get that by putting yourself out there and being with people, and I think it's one of the most important things. COVID changed a lot of things. We learned we could work
Yep.
from home.
Yep.
We kinda swung back. I don't think it's because people couldn't. I
Right.
think it's just because we tend to default to what has been and what's been comfortable,
Yep.
and I do think people have to think about where are they on that spectrum, if you will, of, are you a person who is more comfortable kind of staying more in the status quo or kind of following how your career develops as things change? Or are you a person who wants to put themselves out there and make the change happen? And
Yeah.
we need both types of people in the
Right.
workforce. And we need that's where diversity and inclusivity come in for me. Diversity is far beyond what we think of it and talk
Yep.
about it today. It's really the experiences and how you adapt in a changing world.
Yeah, no,
So
I
we're
agree.
oh, so we're almost we're almost, at the end of our podcast. I could talk about this probably the rest of the day with you, but, I have 2 final questions. I always end with a question for the guests, and then I end for a question that's more related to the, women who are listening. You're working with professionals trying to figure out what's next. From your personal perspective, what has changed in terms of success, ambition, and, building your career?
Yeah. So almost back and what we were talking about at the beginning, I started my career in HR as an HR assistant, and I would have thought right now that I would be a director of HR at this point. That's not who I am. And that's okay. But I do have elements of that. So the thing that I love is coaching and talking to people about their jobs. I'm that person at, the networking event that will talk to you about your job the whole time, because that's just where I
Yeah.
get my spark from. I will say I am surprised that I started my own business right now, but I love it. I never thought I'd be a solo entrepreneur, but I think it was the best risk I took. It was scary. And it took me a little while to do it, but I can't imagine going back at this point. So, those are two things where I think my career definitely took a lot of pivots, but I'm really happy to say, like, where I am now is where I think I was supposed to end up.
What I would add to that is that then you will also see over time how that evolves into the next. And that's what's been fascinating to me is how much I fell in love again with the things I did throughout my career
Yeah.
and how much I fell in love with things, like side things I did, and then how it's coming together again and reframing itself in a
Yeah.
different way at this phase of my career. How the intersection of all these different things that felt a bit disparate to me are actually
Mhm.
intersecting in the same way. So it's an ongoing process. Women listening, what's the biggest takeaway, I'll call it, that you want them to pull away from this conversation and maybe think about or put into action for themselves?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I would say is really just think about where you are, whether you're currently working or you're looking for a job. What do you really like to do and what don't you like to do? Those are going to be key things to help you navigate your next career step, whether it's a promotion within your company, a lateral move, but that's going to be your key to where to go next.
I love that, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. There's one other thing I wanna add to that of knowing what you wanna do, but somebody who's a good friend and former colleague and mentor of mine had given me coaching advice a few years back. He had a huge, really big job, marvelous at what they did, and then was going to retire from that and go into the next phase. And the career coach had asked them, "What do you wanna do?" And I think you said something similar that that's the what do you wanna do? And they started, and I've done this too, talking about all the things they did in the past. And the person was like, "I didn't ask you that. I asked, what do you wanna do now?" That's you own that you have that experience, that's
Yeah.
yours. What do you wanna do now? And I think to your point, what you're
Mhm.
asking, totally on point. But there's that little voice too
Yeah.
of you don't always have to build off of what you did. You
Yeah.
can go that nonlinear direction and
Yeah.
try something else and come back again too. So
Yeah, it doesn't mean because you leave, it doesn't mean you can't go back to things, and I think we've both
exactly.
done that in our careers.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. Well, listen, I really appreciate you being here today. This was such a great conversation. And I think what's most important is conversations like this really help us to build the workplaces that we aspire to work in. We hear a lot about what is and what isn't, but not about how do we get there.
mhm,
And so a lot of great information here. And it's been a pleasure having you as my guest.
thank
And
you.
for everybody who's listening, thanks for
Yeah.
joining us at Hindsight in High Heels.